Executive Director of the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility and Associate Professor of Political Science at Swarthmore College. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the 6th Annual Engaged Scholarship Symposium hosted by Swarthmore College. The Lang Center connects Swarthmore College's campus, curriculum, and communities near and far under the rubric of what Ernest Boyer called engaged scholarship, which orients higher education's resources towards our most pressing civic, social, and ethical problems. We're blessed to have what might be the largest and most active engaged scholarship staff at any comparably sized institution, and yet we're regularly humbled by the brilliance and talent of our community partners and the cutting edge work happening at other institutions, which we'll get a sense of in this 2022 symposium. The symposium takes place over 3 days, April 11th to 13th, with 3 30-minute presentations each day, led by representatives of leading engaged scholarship institutions. Today's session 1, place-based community engagement, brings together folks from University of Pittsburgh, Penn College of Technology, and Swarthmore College. Tomorrow's session 2, April 12th, covers faculty-led innovations in engaged scholarship, and we'll have folks from Cornell University, Penn State University, and Swarthmore. And finally, day 3, April 13th, covering decolonization and indigenous knowledges, brings together Swarthmore with Blackfeet Community College and University of Kansas. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, my friend and colleague, Mr. Hanif Parker, who's an associate organizer with the internationally renowned Industrial Areas Foundation, as well as a senior consultant to Swarthmore College and other higher education institutions. Hanif is a brilliant scholar and activist. We're delighted to have him kicking off this year's Engaged Scholarship Consortium as the moderator of day 1. Hanif.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Before we kick off today's session, I would just like to go over a few housekeeping rules. So the audience are welcome to submit Q&As via the Q&A box. Panelists will have 20 minutes for a presentation, followed by a 5-minute discussion in the Q&A. Panelists are also asked to mute their mic when they are not speaking. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Craig Miller, an associate professor of history and political science and department head of social sciences and humanities at Penn College.
Thank you, Hanif, and thank you, Ben, and I'd like to just thank Swarthmore and all the other panelists for participating and for having us. It's a great honor. I am going to talk about kind of my backdoor approach to prison reform. Prison reform is something I've been interested in and involved in going back getting old, but almost 20 years. When I was in graduate school, and as Honey said, I'm a professor of history and political science. When I was in graduate school, I started teaching and adjuncting inside the state prison system in New York. And in my last 2 years of graduate school, I was approached by the director who wanted to retire to take the program over. And I did. The unfortunate part was that I took over in 2008 and 2009 when the financial crisis hit. We lost all our funding and the program folded a few years later. So I had to get back on the job market, but prison education and prison reform is really where my heart has always been. And that's largely because of the experiences that I had inside. And one of the things that I've learned throughout my work in the prisons is that sometimes I have to be a little bit of a guerrilla in that I can't really be upfront about what it is that I'm trying to do. I have to speak the language of the politicians and the people who want to get the money to get the actual work, to do the actual reform. And so there's no question that prison education is transformative. In one of my last ditch efforts to save the prison program in New York, I did a 10-year recidivism study. And the state's own figures said that about 47% of the inmates in the New York State prison system reoffended. And in the program we were running, where students were getting both bachelor's and associates and certificates, the recidivism rate was 7%. It was an unqualified success. And so I've been living rather in Pennsylvania for the past 10 years. And over the past 4 years, I've been working with several colleges, Swarthmore being one of them, Bucknell, Penn State, Luzerne, Hack, to try to create a consortium of colleges to start increasing the amount of offerings that in Pennsylvania, if any of you are familiar with the Pennsylvania state prison system, the opportunities for higher education, technical training are few and far between. And part of that is kind of nationwide after the 90s when all Pell Grant funding was cut from prisoners inside the system. With second chance Pell funding, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that's become a little bit more attainable. And then for those of you who aren't aware, the second chance Pell funding is going away next year, and prisoners will be eligible for a straight Pell I believe, beginning in 2023. But so through the consortium, we've all been trying to pilot projects to increase the amount of higher education offerings inside the prison system. I work at a college of technology, but I'm a historian in a political science in a college where there are no history or political science majors. And so what I've tried to do is connect the institution I'm working at to the broader mission of prison reform. And that connective tissue has been workforce development. One of the big challenges, obviously, in the Commonwealth, but nationwide, the number of jobs, but the lack of skilled workers for those jobs. Inmates in the system obviously have the extra added barrier of having a criminal record that makes it even harder to find gainful employment when you're out. Any of you who have any familiarity with the prison system knows that in many ways it's a cycle that's in some ways designed to keep people inside as opposed to becoming empowered individuals on release. So what I've done is I've worked with our county prison, and the county prison was willing to let us offer one 3-credit course inside their prison. That is also a required course in about 10 certificates the college offers in technical career fields. So things like CNC machinist, plumbing, welding, baking and pastry arts. I think it's diesel technicians. And all of those certificates at our college require lower level English course. I think it's English 010. It's a technical and professional communication course essentially that works on interpersonal communications in the workplace, resume writing, application writing. And we are the college, I've convinced our provost, who is soon to be our next president, to fund a pilot covering the tuition costs for up to 10 students for 2 semesters as a pilot. We also decided to apply to try to offset some of that funding for that second chance Pell funding. For those of you who are not aware, again, the Pell funding was cut off to prisoners in the 90s. The Obama administration started a pilot program where institutions could apply to become second chance Pell, meaning if you were an institution that either was offering or wanted to offer programming inside a prison, if you became an authorized second chance Pell institution, then the inmates in that program could apply and receive Pell. So we decided, because we're starting this in 2022, we're in that application process. We just got through the second phase, and we're hopeful that we will get approved to try to offset some of that funding. The broader mission here is obviously to try to get grant money down the road. And all of you who have any experience with grant writing know that it's near impossible to get grant money for a seed program to begin it. But once you have something running, it's a little bit easier to find that funding. So we'll start doing this in fall of 2022. We'll have a second class in spring of 2023. And the goal of the metrics that I'm measuring are first recidivism, which is a little bit harder because it's an elusive population, but also how many of these students end up matriculating into the actual college program. The college, as I said, is willing to fund the tuition for the first semester. Of course, if any of those students were then transferred into our program, one of the things that I'm working on is building a pipeline to network these students to our financial aid and admissions office so they can find out what other kinds of aid they're eligible for, have help filing and processing all their FAFSA applications. The obvious goal here is to convince over the long term institutions like the Lycoming County Prison and hopefully expanding to the state prison, the value of higher education in prison. I'm obviously interested in workforce development. I think having a career pathway post-prison release is in the best interest. But again, as I said, my kind of guerrilla tactics here is that I'm more interested in prison reform overall. And I think that the prison system as it currently exists, having worked inside of it, does everything but help people to spend less time inside prison as designed to keep people in there. And I think the more programs that exist, particularly higher education, the more possibility there is for broader society to start to see prison as something other than what it currently is. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges of the perceptions of both prisons and the people that are contained within them. And so the broader goal here is to start small, but then go large. And then what I've been working on with Ben and some other folks from these other institutions is once we have some of these programs set up across the state, to start building articulation agreements between these colleges so that inmates who get transferred to different institutions or who may start in one part of the state but then get released to another part of the state have the opportunity to continue not only their program, but possibly complete their degree. Obviously, what I'm doing in the county prison is a 1 semester, 1 class pilot. So these students are not going to finish their degrees inside. This is one of the challenges in working with the county prison. For those of you who aren't aware, most people serving time or who are inside county prisons are serving either less than 2-year sentences, are awaiting transfer to another prison, or are awaiting a trial date or a court appearance. So the vast majority of these inmates would not be there long enough to complete a degree. And to accommodate for that, we're doing an 8-week accelerated course. So the instructor who will be teaching the course will start, I believe, in the first half of the fall semester, but be finished midway through the semester. This allows us to kind of get a target audience where we're hopeful that the vast majority of students who enroll can complete while they're inside. If somebody does happen to get released before they finish the program, the instructor is willing to do independent studies to complete the rest of the coursework with those people. So the longer term challenges with this are keeping it going past the first year. We're going to obviously use some of the data we get to continue to apply for grants. I've had interest from Muncie State Prison, which is a women's prison in Pennsylvania, not too far from the college. But one of the challenges, obviously, getting inside the state prison, some of you are probably familiar with, is getting materials in and out. The county prison has a little bit more flexibility than some of the state prisons do. So there's going to be 2 dedicated computers. The students will actually be able to access a learning management system. Ours is D2L, and we call it Plato. The flip side to that is that I can't have any of the students apply for FAFSA or Pell while they're inside, because they need to have an email address that they can verify their account when they create it for FAFSA or for Pell. So this is going to be a lot of shuffling paperwork back and forth between the institution and the prison. Again, these are some of the more logistical challenges that are the least sexy parts of this, but some of the more important parts of this and making sure that it happens. I know Hanif has some experience understanding all this, with his experience with NJ Step, because they've been very helpful in giving us information about some of the logistical challenges and hurdles that they ran into. But we are hopeful. We've had really good buy-in. The more I talk about workforce development, the more buy-in I get from local politicians. I don't ever talk about social justice. Rarely, I should say, I talk about social justice with politicians, particularly in the county I'm in. The county I'm in is obviously more heavily Republican, if any of you are familiar with the region. And I always end up having to talk about things in terms of workforce development and reduced costs to the county overall through reduced recidivism. That's also something I learned when I was in New York. I had some in the program in New York. We had all of our money was line item money, or I should say the vast majority of it was line item money from the state legislature. There were state legislatures in New York City who were on board, understood it was not just that their populations were the ones that were being impacted, but the social justice conversation was easier to have with them. But when I was talking with Republican state senators who were the ones in the districts the prisons were in, I had to really change the message. And I found that this focusing on workforce development, focusing on reduced costs, increased tax base potentially if people are getting employed, that language is getting me a lot more traction when I need the buy-in from, particularly at the local and county level, from those politicians. And so I think I've covered the vast majority of what we're trying to do with this program and the components of it. And I'm happy to take any questions from anybody about what it is we're trying to do, or quite frankly, any similar experiences or suggestions. Again, thanks for the opportunity to talk about the program.
Are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions for Craig? No?
I'd ask a question if that's okay.
Sure.
Great work, Craig. Thanks for sharing that. Super important stuff. Have you had a chance to connect up this way to Pittsburgh, or is that just a little too far in proximity across the state for partnership?
It's not too far at all. I haven't had the opportunity to go out there because I've simply been in the pandemic, obviously complicated a lot of travel. Things opening up now. We're absolutely willing to partner with anybody who is interested in a further mission. We
had folks running a number of inside out classes pre-pandemic, obviously, and some existing relationships already in place that might be, nice connections for us to make for you. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm guessing Nimesh, you probably have emails from all three of us. Or excuse me, emails that are connected through Nimesh. So feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
Somebody had their hand up in the chat, I think.
Just feel free to voice your questions, anybody.
Ashley.
Ashley, I think you need to unmute if you want to talk, Ashley.
Oh, okay. I just wrote it in the chat. I'm sorry about that. So what does this program look like for inmates that are awaiting for state prison sentencing? Like, would they be able to apply for the program while sitting in the county and finish it, or would they be able to start it and then not be able to finish it because they're going to state?
So from our institution, the partnership is obviously with Lycoming County Prison. So Lycoming County Prison has a lot of say over who they're going to allow to attend and who they're not. Our basic criteria is that somebody has a GED or a high school diploma. As far as finishing when they're going into, if somebody starts the program and then gets transferred into the state prison, we have relationships with enough of the state prisons where we think we can continue that because the instructor is still willing to do independent studies for students who have that disruption. I've had this conversation with the instructor already to talk about there are a lot of challenges that we deal with our street classes that don't even come close to touching on what folks inside have to deal with. So as long as the institution that they are transferred to is willing to work with us, they can complete that course. Completing the rest of the program would happen post-release at this point because we don't have the resources yet to start offering the majority of the coursework inside, but that's obviously the goal, is to start small here, but then be able to expand to the point where students could maybe get the majority, if not all of the credits towards a certificate and hopefully eventually associates and bachelor's degrees while they're inside. Great question.
Anybody else? I want to say a few things if anybody else doesn't have a question. So I was a part of the Mountain View community inside of East Jersey State Prison, but before it was Mountain View, it started in Garden State Correctional Facility. And it was kind of like the same thing what you're trying to establish, Craig, kind of like an interest, how it piques the interest. A person would get like these kind of rudimentary classes and it would spark their interest. So when they came home, they subsequently were more interested in going to Rutgers. And it also has the propensity to separate those who are serious about education and those who may want to engage in a different course of action to gain upward mobility in society. But one of the things that I found really useful, it was kind of novel when it started. I guess it was like really fluent, but county jails are really transient. So it's hard to kind of get a hold on who would really be interested in going downstate as opposed to people who are kind of more settled in the institution. You kind of know their behaviors, you kind of know if they're serious. So it was kind of like a self-recruiting class of prisoners who had inserted themselves into academic situations through correspondence courses, and they would kind of know who to pick. So through these different groups, so the Lifers group, through the education department, through New Directions, groups that were really steeped on kind of sharpening some of those tools, like with guys who were serious about reinventing themselves. So we kind of had like this introduction, and everybody filled out their FAFSA forms. Everybody was kind of like, you just filled them out in this kind of orientation. So you kind of got that out the way. As the program morphed on, you had academic advisors. So for people who were newly coming in, they would kind of get on pass and they would go to an academic advisor and they would fill out their paperwork like that. So you had people who didn't even start, their paperwork was, in the system being processed. So that may be useful and some of the things that you're doing. One of the other things that I found really useful, and I may be a little bit ahead of myself, is with the standardized tests that people have, kind of had like some inside tutoring going on. So guys who had a little more of a handle on math, because you may have some older guys. You may have some older guys who are far removed from taking any math courses, but if you freshen them, if you give them a refresher course on some of the basics of algebra, they may be able to place higher. So it looks better when you're advocating for these classes if you can start with, pre-algebra, or you could start with 135 versus, pre-calculus. Some guys were more advanced, so we were able to have pre-calculus in our second semester, and calculus in our third semester, which really looked good to funders because it's like, listen, this is radical teaching these guys calculus in here. So, and it was a study conducted with MIT and Princeton too, for some students who were taking the same course. So it looked really good for funders. So just to, but if anybody doesn't have any other questions for Craig, or I guess I said a lot for me at that point, we'll transition
Well,
into,
let me see if I can ask one, because following on this, I'm Craig, I'm interested if you have experience in this, and Hanif, if you do as well. But first of all, the question is like, just the biggest challenges that any state faces in trying to put something like this together. Are there certain challenges that rise up above other ones? Also, in terms of the what's taught, you were mentioning funders, Hanif. So it may be the case that people want to fund things just like our vocational education or things that have an obvious applied role. Is there a place for things like liberal arts or things more like philosophy and literature, or is off the focus for the sake of funding to be things that are concrete, applied, and vocational? To either of you want to answer?
Hanif, you hit on two of the biggest challenges already, and that are the first is kind of the buy-in from the students on the inside, and separating out who's genuinely interested in doing something with it, who is using it as a checkbox to get themselves someplace else. The program in New York was phenomenal. When I took it over, it had been going since the 70s. They were able to ride out the wave and find other sources of funding when Pell Access got cut off. And one of the things that made that program so successful is that it was largely inmates who ran it. So the tutors you were talking about were the upper division students who were juniors and seniors in the program, who were working with the younger mentors. My academic advisors were students who helped me. I worked with them on a semester basis to figure out what classes need to be offered to make sure that people were getting their degrees. And the second piece of that, in terms of the preparedness, I'm lucky that I'm working at a college that's an open enrollment institution. So we have to do a lot of placement testing to determine where students are at with reading, writing, and all the kind of basic skill sets that a lot of traditional college students kind of take for granted, right? When I was in the prison system in New York, the vast majority of the men I was working with had an 8th grade education and hadn't done math, as you said, in 10 or 15 years. So we have the bigger challenge, Ben, is identifying those students. Our college is actually starting to move away from placement testing and making shifts to their developmentals. But I do have faculty and staff who are willing to donate time to come in and kind of ad hoc give some of the placement testing that we would do to gauge where some of these people are at. Broadening that out when we get into the state prison system is going to be a lot more of a problem in terms of I'm going to need dedicated staff who are doing it more than just on a volunteer basis to come in. And particularly, it's Hanif said, and he's right, it's easier when I'm on the inside with people who are in a state prison who are doing a little bit longer bits, because I get a longer period of time to work with that population, whereas the county prison population is a lot more transient. To your question about, is there space for liberal arts? That's where my heart still lies too. And when I was teaching history courses in American government and international relations courses inside, it was amazing. It was the most transformative experience, the most beneficial teaching experience I've ever had. One, because if you've ever taught before, particularly within a major, the conversations can get kind of rote. The students know what's expected of them. There's a general sense. When I started talking international relations with people who were in prison or coming from these way different backgrounds than your traditional college student, the conversations were phenomenal. And so I feel as though the way to get there is to start with workforce development, to start with kind of these courses that have a demonstrated pathway towards some kind of career success that also reduce recidivism, to then build off of that to make the case that, you know what, if you're going to have people who are going to be serving even longer terms and who get even more skills and get a full bachelor's degree. I mean, one of the things I like about Penn College is it's a hands-on applied technology school, but they actually believe in the liberal arts component of it too. So while there's not a history major here, every student has to take a history course for a bachelor's degree before they graduate. They all have to take a social science course before they graduate. And so I think there is space for that. And I think it's one of the more important components, because part of that transformation from whatever got you into prison in the first place to getting you out is not just about finding a job. It's about finding yourself and finding your space and your connection with the rest of the world. And there's no question that a college education is an empowering, it's empowerment rather. And empowerment doesn't just come through getting your specific hands-on training. Empowerment comes through investigating philosophy and history and psychology and all those other components that form that core, that liberal arts. But my experience has been that when I start with that, I don't get anywhere. So that I need to start more with what people can wrap their heads around, which is basically workforce development, and then kind of build from there.
Okay. That was excellent, Craig. Thank you. Thank you for your insight. So without further ado, we'll introduce our next speakers, which is Jamila Dukar. I'm the Executive Director of Engage Campus at the University of Pittsburgh, and Keith Caldwell, the Director of Impact and Continuity Community Engagement Centers at the University of Pittsburgh.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello, hello. We're happy to be here.
Jamie, do you want to get, is the shared screen up?
Let's see here. It's not allowing me to select. There we go.
Excellent. And thanks for the shout out, Shanae. We appreciate you. So happy to be here today. The title of our presentation is With and Within, centering place and context across an institution. So thinking about our approach to community engagement, both with and within our community and communities nearby. So as said, I'm joined by Jamie Dukar, and we're happy to share with you today a little bit about our approach and the structure that allows us to do some pretty great work here. So our agenda will really focus on a couple of areas. Of course, always starting out with context for practice. Want to make sure everybody has a good understanding of our institution and the surrounding communities that we partner with and the work that we do. What our concept is, our framework is for community engaged work, and Jamie will do a nice job, I know, leading us through that and really painting a really important picture for how we sort of view and value our work and how that distills throughout everything that we do, which will transition to me talking about how we contextualize very deeply at the community level and some of our neighborhood commitments that we've made. And then we'll have some time for some Q&A. So without further ado, I think Jamie will take us off a little journey of making sure everybody knows where Pitt is and Pittsburgh is.
All right, thank you, Keith. So the city of Pittsburgh, it is a mid-sized city of 300,000 people. Allegheny County bumps us up to about 1.3 million folks. And then when you look at the greater Pittsburgh region, we have a little over 2 million folks. So just as a context, right, this is a place where most people are no more than 3 points of contact removed, right? It's a place where folks know each other, and family histories and institutional histories really are quite present, right, in the oral tradition of our neighborhoods. It's also a city of many, many neighborhoods. So there are 90 neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh. Once you add in all the boroughs and municipalities of Allegheny County, it can be a sometimes confusing place to be, right? And so we'll be talking about the University of Pittsburgh campus, which you can see sort of a box here on our image showing North Oakland, Central Oakland, South Oakland, and West Oakland. So those are all the pieces of the single neighborhood of Oakland where we find our home. A little bit about our institutional context here. So just for comparison's sake, right, the size of our campus, we have a little bit less than 30,000 students on our Pittsburgh campus, an additional almost 5,000 students in our regional campuses. And our professional faculty and staff make up about 13,000 strong. So a large urban campus, no gates, no long rolling lawns, right? We're an urban landlocked university.
So with the city as our campus, it provides us opportunities to be involved and engaged in a whole host of ways. And like with any organization, we're guided by a strategic plan, and we have 3 strategic pillars that help support the work that we do and define the work that we do with our Office of Engagement and Community Affairs. Certainly we think about the people that power our organization and the programs that power our organization, but certainly our purpose. We've boldly committed that we're here to improve lives and communities at every scale by creating knowledge and leveraging our expertise to tackle some of society's greatest and most pressing challenges. So making sure that that's clearly stated on the front end of our work and how we effectively engage in our community practice. And how does that get operationalized? Well, it gets operationalized in our case through our Office of Engagement and Community Affairs, where Jamie and I both have the pleasure of working. We championship engagement across efforts across the university. So we'll talk today about that close, tight neighborhood piece where we are in Oakland one of 90 neighborhoods, but the Oakland neighborhood within the city of Pittsburgh, but then also the ways in which we look to provide positive impact and meaningful benefit to some of our other neighbors through our neighborhood commitments. So our neighborhood commitments are defined exactly as that we've identified that we have a responsibility to be effective and meaningful partners in the well-being of our communities. And I'm focusing primarily in this case on communities of place, geographic communities, but we'll also have to talk about some of the intersections of communities' identity within there as well. We have 3 specific neighborhoods off of the campus that I'll talk about in a little bit. But in the interim, Jamie will be able to talk to you a little bit more about our work specifically in our own primary neighborhood of Oakland.
Great, thank you, Keith. So I'll be sharing a little bit about the story of University of Pittsburgh and how our praxis has shifted over time. I can specifically speak to the last 5 years, which is the duration of time we've been able to realign our community affairs role to be more conversant with the things that we were learning culturally as we engaged in the process of building up our community engagement centers. I'll also spend a little bit of time talking about some of the resources that we have for staff, student, and faculty capacity to be able to engage in community-facing work ethically and with a culture that our office is building a coalition of the willing for, right? So this is our institutional support structure. This is something that's fairly new, but I think it would be helpful to just sort of share with this audience all of the ways in which we're thinking about how we build up our own internal capacity. I serve as the co-chair for Outreach and Engagement Staff Community of Practice. That launched in 2019 or the 2019-2020 academic year. Part of the reason why we brought that group together is we had recently gone through the process of doing our self-study attached with the Carnegie classification for engagement. And we realized that having these communities of identity or affinity, right, around our outreach and engagement praxis would be an important part of the larger ecosystem of us doing our work in a more connected way and also in a more conversant way to the cultures, again, that we're hoping to share through the work of ECA. We also built out an outreach and engagement map after hearing across the institution, right, that there were folks that had overlapping sets of partners and were unable to sort of find each other in any meaningful way unless they happened to bump into each other in the neighborhood, right, and sort of ask each other about one another's work. Or if a partner were to share, right, I'm also working with the University of Pittsburgh on this thing and this thing. Don't you guys communicate with one another? So our outreach and engagement map, which can be found at engagementmap.pitt.edu, is our way of being able to reach across the university, zoom out a little bit, and take a look at all of the different ways in which we're engaging in partnered work, both locally, but also globally. So you can zoom all the way out on that map and be able to identify a point of contact, an institutional leader that shepherds that work, and be able to directly link out to our community partners where they're listed. Another way that we're building our capacity, right, is through setting institutional touch points to show, right, that we're interested in elevating and celebrating our faculty and staff that are engaged in community engaged scholarship and praxis. And so touch points like this one today that Swarthmore is hosting we have a very similar concept, the Community Engaged Scholarship Forum. It's our way to showcase internal folks, but also to bring national voices to the University of Pittsburgh that can help us think ahead to where we'd like to be in the future. And so we pair that with our Partnerships of Distinction Awards, which will offer project funding for exemplars of community engaged scholarship. This year, we had an amazing set of awardees. And so I would ask everyone, and hopefully I can put it to the chat to all attendees, but to visit cesf.pitt.edu to learn more about those partnerships and see the way in which we sort of celebrate that body of work. And then finally, we were able to pilot an engaged scholarship development initiative, which involved our faculty and their community partners being able to be in an intensive cohort experience together. Folks walk through all of our core understandings of community engaged scholarship. And then the partnerships actually had a summer design intensive, right, where they were able to co-create critical projects that had the support of funding for us to be able to continue to be innovative in this way and continue to elevate our partners. I also wanted to share how engagement has started to shift the way even our business and operations are able to engage with our neighbors and the general public. So in the city of Pittsburgh, every large institution or nonprofit is required to support and submit a zoning document called an institutional master plan. Those institutional master plans started out as a way for the city to be able to plan for the future growth of large institutions and organizations. So again, for context, City of Pittsburgh has 11 colleges and universities in its city limits of 300,000 people. And so that can deeply impact the way that the city looks and feels and grows. And so this time around, the institutional master plan process asked institutions to really consider what it means to have thoughtful public engagement tagged to that process. That's where our office came in. And so I was grateful to be part of this cross-institutional, cross-functional team that was looking very deeply at how our physical footprint of our campus and its growth might potentially impact our neighbors in different ways. And so we looked at the good, the bad, right, the tensions in what it means to be a growing, thriving urban institution. And we laid out all of the different strategies that we would be able to use to ensure that the University of Pittsburgh could continue to do its best to be a good neighbor, but to also consider how it is we can improve access to our facilities, to our programs, and to things that are helpful to our neighbors. And so this was a process that we took to get to those 70+ strategies. It was really, really iterative. We had in-person meetings. This was pre-pandemic. We had in-person meetings where we were workshopping any idea that came to the community's mind. We have about a 250-page appendix of actual photos of our workshopping and of the human-centered design principles that we use to be able to cultivate the voice of our residents in this process. We heard certain things loud and clear. And so that's how we ended up coming out with our first round of strategies and sort of thematic overlays, right? We were starting to connect some dots in the picture here. We went back to our residents, right? And we said, are we hearing you right? Is this what you've offered to us, that you want us to invest in community building in these ways? And we came out with another round. And so it was as you can imagine, it takes a lot of staff time and attention to be able to do this in a meaningful way, to be able to have folks' immediate responses incorporated and shifting our plan as we go. And so we spent a full 2 years working on this. It took, I would say, a lot of flexibility and a lot of advocacy, but I think that we were able to go there. And it marked a new way, I think, of partnering within the university. So moving out of that IMP process, we now have a larger team of close partners in the Office of Community Engagement and Community Affairs, and also with our Planning, Development, and Real Estate Division. I think it's important to note that because sometimes community practitioners, right, feel a certain amount of tension with the actions of business and operations, right? I think it's really, really important to note that at the University of Pittsburgh, we work quite closely to be sure that we can minimize ahead of time anything that might stand in tension or polarity with how we'd like to show up in communities. All right. And so those are our three big buckets for our institutional master plan. We want to alleviate, enhance, and improve. And I believe we actually even shifted from alleviating, right, to creating responsive solutions, being able to pull out assets in every relationship and be responsive as a matter of course. And I'm proud to say that that's the process that we've moved to. So happy to hand it over to Keith. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. So what you've all been provided is a really wonderful framework for understanding how we approach, and Jamie leads the engaged campus. That also distills over to our community engagement centers, which I'm happy to share with you all today. Our community engagement centers are a front door to the University of Pittsburgh in the neighborhoods, in a couple of the neighborhoods that are right nearby us. And why would that be? Why would we need to have community engagement centers in neighborhoods that are right around the corner? Well, because proximity doesn't necessarily mean access. And we always want to be really clear about that. So we operate 2 and are working on a 3rd community engagement center. Actually, if you go back to the map, Jamie, I'm sorry, I just wanted to point out. So you've seen where we are in Oakland. To the far right of the map is the Homewood community of Homewood North, Homewood West, Homewood South, and then also a little bit of East Hills joins in our community engagement center as well. That is located there. And then very close to our Oakland neighborhood is the Hill District. And you'll see that listed as Terrace Village, Upper Hill, Middle Hill, Bedford Dwellings, and Crawford Roberts. And those are 3 neighborhoods that make up the Hill District, where we have our 2nd community engagement center. Our to-be 3rd community engagement center is just south of us in Hazelwood. And I'd like to walk you through each of those today. So again, very close in proximity. I'm sorry we don't have a scale to show you actual distance, but we can get to all 3 without traffic in no time at all. There's no such thing as no traffic. So there's always a little bit of a hustle to get to and from, but they are all quite close. But again, proximity doesn't necessarily mean access. So if we can go ahead forward, Jamie, I'd appreciate that. So our community engagement centers, as said, provide a front door to our university within the community. It's a place where folks can engage and participate in and enjoy the resources of the university that have not been invested in the neighborhood in the past, right? The ability to provide access and opportunity for learning, for health benefit, for service, for so on and so forth. But what really matters in that is that we're not necessarily creating programs that we're providing. We're a facilitator of university community partnerships. So thinking about how all this links together, when Jamie's talking about this critical importance of things like a community engagement scholarship forum, how do we make sure that our faculty and staff are really prepared to do effective, mutually beneficial community engagement, work that is sustained, work that is meaningful, and work that is sanctioned by the community? Well, it connects into our ability to be successful in our community engagement centers. This one has been open for about 4 years. Like anything else over the last couple of years, the pandemic, of course, put a pause on a lot of things, but our community engagement centers were quite active in pandemic response, both directly and indirectly. So provide us, again, some really important neighborhood assets to be able to provide service to communities that have experienced a lot of divestment over the years. Homewood is a community of about 6,400 residents. So it's a relatively small neighborhood, only in comparison to the amount of residents that used to live there over the time. As such, we're looking at about almost 50% vacant or abandoned properties in the community. So it's experienced a high level of divestment, but it's a longstanding and cherished African-American community within our city. And when Jamie mentioned earlier, it's such an important point about the importance of the legacy of family history and the importance of understanding the memory of institutional history and impact on communities within our neighbors. It's why this process for us is also iterative. The ability to build these engagements, to build these community engagement centers started with lots and lots and lots of conversations, and of equal, if not greater importance, lots and lots and lots of listening. And we continue to listen. We continue to listen about what people are interested in, what challenges they're facing, and what we can do to continue to grow in our trust between an institution and neighborhoods that have not always been treated the best by this institution. So part of that trust comes from how we approach communities. And one thing I'll highlight for you with each of these community engagement centers, Homewood, our next one in the Hill District, and then our third one in Hazelwood, is that we do not own anything. We're not a university coming in and buying a property. We lease property from existing property owners within the community. It's a long-term commitment. So in Homewood, where we are right now, we have a 15-year lease with 2 5-year extensions available to us. So an opportunity to always be engaged in community discussions about how long we'll be here and what we'll be up to. In the Hill District, we'll be looking to have about a 30-year lease over there. And Hazelwood is just getting going at this point, but they're each distinct and unique neighborhoods. Hazelwood, as you'll see from these 2 pictures here, is in the midst of a pretty significant redevelopment process. All of this green space that you see here is what's identified locally as a brownfield. This is a former location of a large steel mill that employed lots of people that closed, Jamie, early 90s, 93, 92, somewhere around there. And it's been sitting vacant ever since. Local charitable foundations have held that space under a trust called Almano and have started the process of reinvestment. So in the middle there, you'll see an old mill that's been converted into a pretty amazing science and technology space by a partner university. The folks over at Uber, and then eventually I think it was Argo AI, were over there testing driverless vehicles for some time as well. So there's a lot of neat things going on, but it's a really important time for us to come in there as a community engagement center and ensure that we can help facilitate community benefit from all of this local investment, both at the university and community level. So we've given you a lot of information here, and we're right at about our 22-minute time here. So we did want to wrap up and give folks a chance to ask questions. The last thing I'll share with you before we jump into questions is that so I've been doing community engaged work here at this university for 14 plus years through my previous role in teaching and service in the School of Social Work. And one thing I think is so important to know is that there's been a lot of amazing grassroots effort that helped set an amazing foundation for the more formalized results that you see here today. And it's a pretty amazing thing to see, not only that that iterative and ongoing and deliberate and long view process has been successful. It's also amazing that we haven't lost that process, right? That we've maintained the very focused, deliberate, and long-term approach to doing this work and doing it well.
Questions, concerns, comments? Does anybody have a question? Feel free to unmute and ask the question or put it in the Q&A.
Oh, we're waiting for anyone else there. Can you talk to some of the biggest challenges you faced? I mean, this is really amazing stuff, and there's so much thought that's gone in. And I've talked to Jamie about the amount of personal time invested in this too. There's sort of the face time and developing relationships. Can you talk about some of the biggest challenges, hurdles, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that one of the primary challenges is that the University of Pittsburgh is such a large place, right? And so we have to understand that there are always going to be relationships outside of our small team's sphere of control, sphere of influence. We're a very big place, and we're still responsible for being responsive to what it is our colleagues are doing every day. So I think that just sort of that level of being a very small team and communicating to a very large set of overlapping audiences is really our largest challenge as we look to sort of tackle and build an institution-wide culture and orientation.
I would just add to that, and then I'm going to jump over to a question we have here in the Q&A boxes. But I would just add that some of our greatest challenges I always see as our greatest asset when people are true gatekeepers into their community, when there's strong community local leadership that is going to ensure that we have to vet and properly come correct into neighborhoods and communities, it's a really important asset. So while it's challenging, it's one of the best things to be able to work with. One of my favorite things, like, I can't work with apathy, right? I can work with folks who are going to really put you through the paces and let you know what's going to make for a great engagement in their community. And along those lines, in the Q&A, some questions about some examples that are happening in our community engagement centers. So one thing I'd highlight is that there's no menu of programs that just gets established in each area. Again, being responsive to community needs, working in concert with community assets. I should have clarified earlier, one of the ways in which we keep that process going is each of our community engagement centers has a neighborhood advisory council. That neighborhood advisory council is at least represented by a minimum of 50% of the members are residents. So great community organizations are represented there as well, but that resident voice is so critical as a part of this. And so there's a process to review and discuss. So here in Homewood, there was a big need and request for youth and out of school time programming, but it was needed on the weekends, right? So an opportunity to build a partnership through a program we call Penn and Rich that provides tutoring both in the elementary schools, in the classroom with university students from our School of Education and our School of Social Work, as well as Saturday tutoring sessions here. So again, the example that I like so much about that is an opportunity to talk with the community, identify a need, make sure we weren't duplicating or pushing out folks who've been here a long time, right? Because we know that oftentimes universities have a history of bringing in short-term or not necessarily sustained programs and initiatives. So we want to complement the stuff that's continuing to be sustained along the way. We have weekly office hours at each of our CEC sites with a member of the university's Office of Human Resources who does counseling and training around securing employment at the university, which, as we know, comes with tuition benefits for dependents and spouses and self. So it opens up all kinds of opportunities through employment at the university. But that training can also be carried over to employment in any other sector as well. They're not required to apply for Pitt jobs if they get support from Pitt HR. We host our friends at Neighborhood Legal Services who provide pro bono legal advice on a weekly basis as well. So again, an existing university partner, an identified resource and service of need, and an opportunity to host it in a location where folks feel comfortable coming in. There's a whole lot more. I'll pop up. It seems like we've been dropping a number of our links in the chat, so I'll drop a little program link in there as well.
Yeah, I think we have 2 more questions and maybe 3 minutes to probably answer those 2 questions if that's possible. So
yeah, we'll give it a try. So I'll go to Sarah's first here. How do you challenge leaders to think broader and act bolder? Part of, I would say, some of the leverage that we used, right, was the fact that our institutional master plan is such a public-facing document, right? This was our ability to sort of show what was going to be a priority to the University of Pittsburgh over a 10-year window. It also went through a public approvals process. So this is a document that goes to our planning commission, it goes to city council and has to be approved, and it also goes to the office of the mayor for final signature. The University of Pittsburgh can't bring a weak public plan, right, to through that sort of process. And so we had some leverage there. I think genuinely our partners and our partners were ready and willing to engage with us in different ways. And so that meant really, really working internally to get the right set of people to a physical table, right, where we could talk across all of our functions and be able to come up with something that we would all be proud of. Happy to share more via email too. I know that we'll probably give our contact information. And then how many people are on our team, right? So fully staffed up, we're about a team of, I want to say 14 folks, 15 folks, including our administrative staff, our leadership, place-based folks, and also the engaged campus, which reports to me. So not too big.
Each of our community engagement centers generally has 4 staff members, a center director, an outreach coordinator, a receptionist, and a welcome attendant. We're very explicit about not having a traditional guarded security system. We hire from the community and have community leadership that provides us with both support if need be, but then also primarily focusing on that welcoming role for all members of the community.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Keith. I would like to transition For the sake of time, to the Chester Swarthmore Fellows Council, Community Scholars Creating Knowledge at Swarthmore College.
Thank you, Hanif, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Henry, and I'm the Program Manager at the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility at Swarthmore College. The mission of the Lang Center at Swarthmore College is to connect the college's curricular excellence to engagement with communities. And in my role, I assist with facilitating partnerships between the college community and the local community of Chester, Pennsylvania specifically. Because Swarthmore is a small private liberal arts college with a total of approximately 1,500 students, so much smaller than a big research university, our approach to community engagement really focuses on deepening our relationships in fewer areas so that we don't spread ourselves beyond our capacity. And so our collaboration with Chester is a reflection of that. Chester is a really special place for many reasons that you'll hear more about today. But I would say that the most remarkable asset of this city, and I'm sure of the cities proximate to your campuses as well, is the wealth of community expertise and knowledge that exists. Now, an unfortunate reality is that the wisdom of community scholars is oftentimes left untapped or even treated as inferior to the knowledge that resides within the academy. We've read about this in the body of literature on engaged scholarship, or maybe even observed this fact through our own community engagement experiences. However, engaged scholarship work that fails to acknowledge and center community perspectives and participation can be a real missed opportunity. So that begs the question, how might we endeavor to keep the community at the heart of our community engagement work? Well, actually, I hope to learn that answer together with all of you throughout the course of this 3-day symposium. However, in this presentation today, we're happy to share some of our efforts in this regard by hearing from 3 members of the Chester Swarthmore Fellows Council, a newly formed group of Chester resident leaders who possess wide and deep local roots in the city and who serve as an advisory body that informs and contextualizes the college's Chester engagements. The foundation for this council was laid many years ago by the Lang Center's former director of Community Partnerships and Planning, Cynthia Jetter, who in 2004 established the Chester Swarthmore Learning Institute, which was an organizing entity for engaging faith-based organizations in the city of Chester. The membership of this Learning Institute consisted of leaders of several churches, and its primary focus was to support and reform the primary and secondary educational systems in the Chester Upland School District. Our goal in establishing the Chester Swarthmore Fellows Council was to then strengthen this model to include a broader representation of Chester leaders and shift the focus of the work being done to address a greater area of community needs. Now, only in its inaugural year, the Chester Swarthmore Fellows Council has accomplished much already. Its members have participated as co-educators in the classroom alongside our faculty. They've guided the curricula for our Chester-focused courses to ensure that our students are engaging with the most relevant areas and issues impacting the city. And they continue to convene to explore future campus community collaborations that will have mutually beneficial impact. So in addition to presenting on what has worked well within this collaboration, we also hope to address some common missteps that can occur when colleges seek to partner with communities and lessons learned that might help inform the community engagement efforts at your institutions. So at this time, I have the pleasure of inviting our council members to share the individual expertise they bring to the council as it relates to their leadership in Chester. And to begin, I'd like to introduce Ms. Twyla Simpkins of the Yes We Can Achievement and Cultural Center, with Jim Turner to follow. Ms. T, welcome.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Ashley. Always interesting to find out more information about Chester, and I'm good friends with Cynthia, but did not realize one of the things that she had started back in '04. So it just adds to the history. By way of introduction, my name is Twyla Simpkins. My nickname is Miss T. I find that oftentimes I'm working with folks much, much younger than me. And one of the things that I have to establish is that they understand my culture. And in my culture, you just don't call grown folks by their first name. And so, Miss T. And that kind of sets the tone so that it isn't any mistakes, it's not any awkwardness or whatever. So please feel free, Miss T. All right. I took a branding class through Chester Made, which was a organization that was supporting initiatives to grow our city. And I took a branding course, and it said if you Google yourself, depending on what you find, determines your next moves. So if you Google me, you'll find out all the stuff that I've done. And if you look at the pictures that are attached, you'll see a lot of what I've done. So I don't want to spend a lot of time about that. If you want to know who I am, just Google me and find out. And I also found you can find my telephone number. So give me a call. All right. With that, my organization, I retired from teaching. I taught 35 plus years in Chester Upland School District. And I knew it was time, even though it was early in my career. And I went to volunteer for an older institution, the YWCA Chester. And I ended up being the last volunteer there. And we got kicked out of the organization because when you don't pay dues for 17 years, they kick you out. So I had to reestablish it as the Yes Center. And that's how I came to be involved with that. If you want to know more about the Yes Center, yescenterchester.org. And there you'll find out our history and the things that I've been able to achieve since I've been there. My community position as archivist has grown out of an interest in just preserving history. When I was teaching, I found it very, very difficult to connect sometimes with my students because they just didn't understand. They just didn't get it. So I had to kind of be very, very resourceful and find ways to dig out and dig through and find things that could help them to connect. So I was just always a history buff. So I started sharing things about the city. And that's kind of how I got into really, really connecting my Chester exhibit. And because of what I ended up doing with the Swarthmore and later the Chester Swarthmore Fellows Program, I was able to help inform that curriculum. And I remember just talking one day about trying to understand Chester Upland School District and how many people and how many administrators we'd had and how many superintendents and all that. And I realized that there wasn't an accurate documentation of that. And it took a reporter when we were once again being taken over by yet another receiver to document that. So I was able to turn around and share that information with the class. So as I found out things about Chester, that's how I get it to the class, Chester 101, as I call it, so that they know. In terms of working with Swarthmore College, just instrumental. I'm new at this. I'm a retired school teacher who taught English. I don't know how to do a lot of this stuff. So by reaching out, Swarthmore was able to help me just figure a lot of it out. And so in doing, again, what I was doing, my programming involves the MLK Day of Service. It includes the documentaries that I do, all of which you can find at yescenterchester.org, as well as my latest Changemaker project, which was just gathering stories. And I know some fantastic women, one of whom is Cynthia Jetter. And I know some of the other things that Cynthia has done. And I realized that if I'm going to be successful in rewriting this curriculum for Chester, I need to continue to know and grow its history. And that's how the Women Changemakers came about. And you can find that, yescenterchester.org. Again, if you have any questions of me, please feel free to ask. My number is 856-803-0620. I'm Miss T, and I'm here for what you need me for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. T. And I just wanted to not forget that we also have Corey Long of the Making a Change group. And so Corey, after Jim, we'd love for you to introduce yourself. But Jim, we'd like to turn it over to you.
Okay. See, I was ready to go after Corey because after Corey's story, right? And so, this is makes it really difficult. So but I will take on the challenge. So my name is Jim Turner. I guess my introduction into Chester was my background is in broadcasting. I worked for WDAS Radio in Philadelphia for about 15 years and came to Chester to do a faith-based economic development conference. Is how I got there, which turned into developing a micro enterprise program that worked with about 300 entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs in the city. And then I became the director of economic development during a very robust time in the city of Chester. So I had the privilege of working with a team that was working with the city during a time when about $1.7 billion of renovation started taking place in the city. That number sounds big, but it was really only about 4 different projects, from Harris to the Wharf at Rivertown, the soccer stadium, the transformation of Widener and Crozier working together, and some other things like that. So I've spent my adult life in the city of Chester, really trying to work towards continuing that change from both a community standpoint as well as from our business partnership. So partnering local business, regional businesses together in order to really help develop some of the things that are going on. So we have been working on a lot of different projects, and we are very appreciative to Swarthmore for all of its input and guidance in how you go about making community change. So as the people from Pittsburgh were talking about earlier, you know, Chester is a city of neighborhoods, and as such, every neighborhood has its own identity, and the part of the challenge that the city of Chester has, as Ms. T just alluded to, is the same way that there's been multiple changes in our educational system. There's also been multiple changes in our leadership as it relates to both economics and politics, and so that instability makes it difficult to actually build the foundation for what's going on. So we've been looking to our partnership with Swarthmore to really help us develop some stability factors through some of the classes that they have. And so it kind of started, my relationship with them kind of started around the arts, you know, working with some folks with the pottery class and working with Devin Walls and some other folks on some projects going on down there, and now has really kind of developed into some things around economics. And so one of the questions that I was asked was like, what are some of the opportunities of economic development and potential vocational training here in, you know, with the university, with Swarthmore, as well as the city of Chester. And one of the things as I was thinking about that I realized is that, you know, part of the challenge of any community, and probably the communities that you're in, is not just in the things that you do, but how do you make change, lasting change? And there is a great amount of, as Ashley pointed out, there's a great amount of expertise, you know, within your centers, but sometimes only the piece that you want to get out is given out. So for instance, and not because it hasn't happened where it can happen, but when you look at what Chester is going through right now, there is issues around capacity in local government. So maybe there's a class that could help to support some of that work. So real-time things, not just you know, the historic things, but what are things that can actually make change? You know, the economy is changing. We are now, from a global standpoint, we are now in what is called the fourth economy. And the fourth economy is really those areas of technology that no one in urban communities are really being introduced to. So when you start talking about artificial intelligence, you start talking about 3D design and community banking and all those other kinds of things, smart cell technology. What we are finding is that when you introduce, if you keep trying to catch up, if you're in a long race and you keep trying to catch up, it's hard to do that. But sometimes if you'll get someone that can have to lift you up and jettison you to the front of the line, you can get a lot farther ahead. And so part of what I've been doing recently, and what part of what we're trying to partner with Swarthmore to do, is how do we jettison our young people and our community to where it needs to be, or even ahead of what it needs to be. I'm going to use a term everybody knows, you know, Wakanda. How do we become Wakanda forever in Chester, right? How do we get to the place where we utilize your engineering schools, your economists, you know, those that are in your film and media center, those that are in your computer science. Even, you know, one of the challenges that are facing many urban communities is around conflict resolution. So I know Swarthmore has a peace and conflict studies, right? So how do you take those things and bring them into our community in order to help them really move forward and do the things that they need to do. So I think my 4 minutes is up, and so I'm going to stop. We can talk about this all day long, but those are some of the things that I believe we need to do, and some of the things. And so I'll just do one more thing real quick. I forgot to tell you I'm a minister, so I have 3 opportunities to say that I'm almost finished, right? But here, I'm going to try to make this the last one. We just recently did a project with the Chester Upland School District. I worked with Dr. Parkinson, who's the new superintendent, and introduced him to someone I met in Washington, D.C., who was the head of the National Aviation Department. And so they were talking about the fact that, I'm talking about jettisoning now, right? They were talking about the fact that they needed more women of color and more Black and brown people to get into the area of air traffic control. And so I figured, oh my God, you have to have a doctor's degree to do that. No, it's a certificate course. And so what they did, they've done 2 sessions now at the STEM school and at the high school. And they brought in all the folks from around the country that do aviation, brought them to Chester Upland, and showed them how to use the equipment. Well, guess what? In Chester, and this is they've documented this, they found just in 2 days of the sessions over 25 young people who today could be world-class air traffic controllers. Air traffic controllers start at $50,000. Their career ends around $250,000. So the introduction of those types of programs that are out of the box thinking, those are the type of things that if we bring those into Chester, we add them to some of the other core studies that go along, now you have partnerships that are literally transforming the communities. Because if those young people do what they need to do, stay here, get the additional work that they need, all of a sudden you've created a new economy, and you're now not dealing with a city of poverty, you're dealing with a city of change makers. So that's just one example of some things that could be done that could be very innovative from partnership between your university or your college, as well as what we're doing here in the city of Chester. So done.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, that's really a perfect segue into introducing Corey Long, who is taking the lead in youth development and, like you said, really building the future through our young people. So Corey, we invite you to tell us a little bit more about your leadership in the city. Welcome.
Sure. Good afternoon, Ashley and Ben, and thank you and the faculty for just inviting me. Going after Jim Turner is a hard act to follow. I don't know how I'm gonna measure up to that, but I'll say this: I had 2 mentors since I've been doing community development work over the past 18 years. And one of them is Bishop Dickie Robbins, a native here in the city of Chester, and the other one is Jim Turner. And so I'll say that to say, both my mentors were ministers. So if I get a little long-winded, you'll understand why. But Corey Long, born and raised here in the city of Chester, graduated from Chester High School in 1993. And I went on to the Art Institute of Philadelphia and studied in music and video business and pursued a career in the music industry and local radio. Served on a few of the radio stations here in the Philadelphia region, and did some traveling, DJing for some of the, some artists. Eve was one of them, and secured a record deal with a few other artists, nationally known artists or internationally known artists. But after about 10 years of working in the music and entertainment business, sort of had a spiritual awakening and decided to come back home and to serve here in my community in my late 20s. That was around 2004, and I started a grassroots mentoring program called Team MAC, stood for Team Making a Change. During that time period from 2004 to 2014, in addition to running my after-school program, mentoring program, also did some work with local government, was appointed the anti-violence coordinator and also the assistant recreation director for the city of Chester. And during my time as the anti-violence coordinator for the city of Chester, I worked with, through a partnership with Swarthmore College. Swarthmore student specifically helped me write a proposal to the White House for violence prevention, and it got us an invitation to the White House to their National Violence Prevention seminar. And we did a lot of work around violence prevention. This was between 2010 and 2012. More notably, we had a state of emergency called during that time period. But it was a Swarthmore student that did the lion's share of the research and the writing for that grant that got us to the White House and got us invited, got us some support around violence prevention during that time. So I went on, and after that, decided to just start my own 501c3. 2014, the Making a Change group. We continue to do our mentoring program. We continue to, we've evolved and work with families now. We do case management for some of those families in our mentoring program. And we've more recently just circled back and got more dug in with violence prevention again. So we have a program called GVIN, which stands for Gun Violence Intervention Network and Empowerment Program. Those are our 3 core programs with the Making a Change group. We also do some community outreach we call community connected communities. So we do a live broadcast on Thursday morning. You can check us out at 10 a.m. on our Facebook page. It'll also be downloaded to our YouTube page. And again, Swarthmore has just been great partners, going back over a decade when I was anti-violence coordinator. And also, as of recently last year, I had a chance to speak on a presentation that Professor John Caskey did around housing here in the city of Chester. So, Swarthmore has always been great, and I'm thankful to be a part of Chester Swarthmore Council.
Thank you so much, Corey. So we want to open it up to questions now. We wanted to make sure that we address some of the challenges. So I'll ask the first question if that's okay. So this is to Ms. T, Corey, and Jim. If you were addressing college leaders in any city or community groups interested in partnering with local colleges, what advice would you give each group? Let's start there.
I can start. As a retired teacher, I saw any number of young people coming into our city to teach our children. And because they did not know the history of our city, a lot of confusion, a lot of hurt feelings, and consequently, our conundrum continued when teachers left. And so coming into a community and knowing of that community and knowing about that community, and then when the children come in, sometimes you've got to talk about the community before you can get to teach. And I found that to be very, very true. And and yet no one was capturing the history of the city. So to my knowledge. And so that's why I started doing it. And now they've labeled me to, Chester historian, but I laugh because I just read a lot and take notes. And I wanted to let Corey and Jim know that your archival file in the Heritage Place is growing because I've been taking notes as you spoke. So I'll end.
Corey or Jim, anything to add to that about knowing the history and really being aware of the place and the people before you get started in the work?
Yeah, so I'll just go for a second. I would say that one of the things that colleges and universities have to do or should do, my suggestion is that look at what you're actually willing to do before you come into a community. Oftentimes, communities look at the title college or university, and they think it's basically a panacea of any resource that they need in order to move forward. But oftentimes what happens is because you haven't decided what you really want to do in the community or how you want to be, what resources you want to make available, then you run into the challenge of expectations that cannot be met, or that the areas that the community needs you most in, you haven't gotten either the professors or the provost or whomever to sign off on that in order to make a major impact. So one quick example, when we were working with Widener University and starting and working with helping with education, they were willing to do the K through 8 portion of that, but they didn't have the capacity to do 8 through 12. Well, that created a great problem with the community, because the community was basically thinking, hey, you know what, you started this, but now halfway through the stream, you're going to let the community down and not move forward. And the reality was was that the Board of Trustees and the provost at that particular time was not willing to make that financial investment to make the major change. So be careful about what you come and offer. And when you do come and to offer it, make sure that you're bringing everything you possibly can to the table up front so people know what you're doing.
That's great. Establishing expectations at the outset. Very good. Corey, anything else?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I would just piggyback off of what Jim said and just encourage the students to really build some genuine relationships with individuals in the community. Stakeholders are important, but just common, residents and other students, other, individuals that could be considered peers in the community, just getting to know the lay of the land and identifying what the issues are and going back to, your colleagues, fellow students and your provost, as Jim said, and just kind of seeing what can we do to address these issues. And also not viewing the city of Chester's issues from a perspective that speaks more to the students' comfortability, but more so, what are the most important issues that are happening in the community? So I'll give you an example. A few students reached out to me, recently, and whether they're on the call or not, I'm not sure, but it's I look forward to talking to you. I'll say that up front, but it's for more of an environmental justice conversation. And I am very much for environmental justice here. However, I personally believe that there's 5 other more pressing issues in front of people of Chester before the environmental justice issue. So not just coming in with a perspective saying, hey, that really resonates with me, I'm going to jump in and jump there. Let's look at what are the top issues in Chester and see what we can lend to the issues of this community first.
Thank you, Corey. It's so important to prioritize the interests of the community members before your own. Really, really good advice. I saw one question in the chat that was answered. Are community board members paid for their service? And just a quick answer is yes, that we provide an honorarium for people's time of participation out of respect for the fact that they're dedicating time outside of working hours. We want to make sure that we're just showing respect for that. We feel like that's the best practice that's within our capacity. So yes.
Jump in for 1 second too, and say, Ashley, that that we are a number of folks on the council who aren't joining us today, but who have been integral in shaping our view of what's going on in Chester too, including Miss Annette Pyatt, Kenny Covert, Devin Walls, Miss Barbara Muhammad, Ms. Zerlene Mayfield. I'm not sure if I've forgotten anybody, but the idea of being able to focus with people who are longtime residents, who have longtime roots, and who aren't simply heads of nonprofits that exist outside of the community. So there's nothing wrong with a nonprofit, and Corey runs a nonprofit. It's the idea of it being a grassroots thing that has roots in the city and is run by people who know people in the city. That's what's been so essential about this great group of people, that we've taken a while to try to find who the right folks are together and then get them to help us to figure out what to do in and with Chester. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. So we're just going to put our contact information into the chat for you all to stay in touch. We thank you so much for your attention, and we hope that we'll see you at our future sessions tomorrow and the day after. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Hanif, you've got some comments for us, or help us to wrap up and get our heads around today?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for sharing. And I also want to highlight that I'm the beneficiary of several of the things that was highlighted today. So Craig's work is, the bedrock of my life at this point, my adult life, and me mapping a new identity for myself as a person who's formerly incarcerated. I was the beneficiary of an education while in the inside. I received an associate's degree and subsequently a bachelor's degree from Rutgers School of Criminal Justice when I was released. I graduated with a 4.0 average, and I've immersed myself in academic institutions as a tutor in any way that I can assist them. Also, I'm a community organizer. So what, Jamie highlighted is my professional job is I work with Metro IAF, and it's much like what they're doing in the community around Pitt. They're kind of organizing the community for the betterment, and it's built through relationships. The core of IAF organizing is relational meetings. You meet with people and you help them act within their interests to see if they want to change things within their community. So it's very similar. It's very similar work, and it's place-based in a different way. And what Swarthmore does is, and I love Swarthmore, of course, not only as a consultant and a friend and a colleague of Ashley and Ben, but somebody who has been a beneficiary of some of the things that they can attach you to. So it seems like what they're doing is connecting people to services within the community, right? And it's a community of itself. It's kind of self-serving in that regard. So I just want to thank everybody for their time, and thanks for having me, and thanks for sharing.
Hope to see you all in the next couple of days too, between 12 p.m. Eastern time to 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, both Tuesday and Wednesday for the next 2 sessions. Thank you.